Hi, guys. So happy you could join us today. I am joined by my friend Shelley Kimball, who's a Coast Guard spouse and the Associate Communication Program Director and Senior Lecturer at Johns Hopkins University. And I'm thrilled to be chatting with Shelley because we go way back. And she is just, I don't know, you're a jack of all trades. You've done it all. You've worked at the nonprofit, you started as a volunteer, you've originated surveys, and then you made the pivot. You did all that while you were teaching, and you made the pivot to full-time academia. And so I'm really excited to tell people more about your story because I think there are a lot of spouses out there, and we've spoken to a lot of them, Shelley, who find themselves starting in one industry and then having to pivot to other industries. And
hmm
so you're somebody who, with the benefit of hindsight, can maybe tell them a little bit about what the whole spectrum looked like because you kind of started in one industry, made some pivots, and then went back.
Right.
And so I feel like as a veteran spouse, and my husband retired from the Air Force, so also a veteran spouse, we actually have the benefit of hindsight a little bit because we've made the pivots and now we can go back and kind of tell people, well, this is how it went, this is how I thought it would go, and it was really okay. So
Right.
I'm excited to get started.
Good.
So I love your approach to career trajectory and your flexible mindset. I think that is absolutely key. Can you talk to us a little bit more about taking on lateral moves? Because, I think a lot of us tend not to do those because we think, oh my God, I don't have time. I don't have enough time at this job to take on lateral moves. I need to keep moving, moving, moving.
Right.
So how do you know if a lateral move is the right option for you? And are there certain filters that you yourself use for that decision-making process?
Yeah. So I definitely can say this with hindsight because as I was heading into these zones during my career trajectory, I really thought it would just be stair steps all along the
Right.
way. I was pretty naive, and I also was really sort of set in this goal pathway. I'm really goal oriented. So this idea of taking lateral moves and kind of seeing what happens does not align with my personality type. And so it was a real growth opportunity for me. I'm so grateful now that all of that happened. But when I was sort of on the precipice, it was scary. And so, the thing I wish I knew was it'll be okay. It was okay. I think we all worry about these patchwork sort of resumes and vitas. And I really did. And I thought, who's ever going to hire me with all these weird situations? But I'm able to sort of capture that all into a bundle of skill sets. And that's really how I started to work through these lateral moves. I have never really been a person that needed the big title or needed anything like that, but I do need things like, is this going to be fulfilling? Is this going to teach me something new? Is this in the occupation zone that's important to me? So as I got into moves that made me have a lot of difficulty finding jobs. I had to be introspective about what's most important. What are my priorities? So I realized that teaching is incredibly important to me personally. That I don't not want to teach. Research is super important to me. That curiosity and wanting to learn is a big part of my personality. And then, will this fulfill me in some way if it's not one of those two things? And so it was really trial and error to come to those sort of filters. Being maybe in a work situation that fit research, but maybe didn't fulfill, or fit teaching and didn't fulfill, or wasn't teaching or research, but very fulfilling. So in kind of those experiences, I built that little loose equation for me, but I've also really focused on developing skill sets. And I have always had that ultimate goal of coming back to academia full time if I could make it work. So I was always kind of thinking, would this fit that narrative, that occupational narrative that I could say, oh, but I did this. It's called this, but I was actually doing these things that really do funnel toward this ultimate goal.
No, I love that. And so basically, you always had your eye on the ball. And so it might have seemed like disparate
Mhm.
experiences, but it was always feeding the end goal. And so I'm so happy you mentioned that you were always interested in teaching, lecturing, because I've always wanted to ask how someone would get started doing that for a university and who would this be a good option for?
This is such a great option now that there is so much online learning. So early in my career, online learning was this sort of brand new concept that people hadn't necessarily bought into, and it wasn't as polished as it is now. And kind of in that mid zone, I remember talking to universities about, would you ever have full-time, faculty members who just teach online? And they were like, nope, not happening. But the pandemic absolutely changed that, like most occupations, in recognizing that we have so many students who can benefit from complete online education, and we have faculty members who can benefit from the flexibility in that work. So to become a teacher, lecturer, you generally need a master's degree, and work experience is always really helpful if you've worked in a certain area. Having the advanced degree kind of gets you in the door, but then that work experience that you have is what gives you an edge. And I have found through the years gives you something to kind of tell your students about, or give them that real life perspective. So I feel like those two parts are really important. I think also being kind of technologically savvy, because if you're an online instructor, you are probably setting up courses yourself, you're recording your own lectures. And I say kind of because you don't have to know it all, but you have to be able to kind of read the instructions and navigate it and not be afraid of it. And so I think that those three elements are really like at the core.
No, that makes absolute sense. So how does someone find their first opportunity? Is it like through networking or is it just a job board?
So, weirdly, through my entire career trajectory, the best jobs I got were complete cold calls to department chairs.
Hmm.
Me sending emails to department chairs at every move. So every time we moved a place, I would just send an email saying, can you tell me a little bit about the landscape of what you'll be needing for instruction, in the next year or so? And sending my vita and kind of my areas of expertise, and seeing what happened. And so before Johns Hopkins, I worked at George Washington University, and that's how I got that job, was sending an email to the department chair. And so they're the ones who really know kind of what's ahead, where they might have holes in the scheduling or the curriculum, or where maybe there's a class that hasn't been able to be taught because they don't have the right person. And so they're less likely to have a job posting for those kind of what's coming next. But that said, you can also find a ton of listings in like education associations for whatever the discipline is. I teach in mass communication, so there's an education association that has a ton of listings. There are actually two very big ones that we all kind of follow those listings. But I've also seen things on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn feed will roll through different kinds of openings. And then wherever you are, look at where all the universities are near you. If you had to drive there, what's drivable, what's accessible, and just keep watching their job boards.
No, that's great. And I mean, I think it's also important that people recognize that, you have to put the work in. It's not like someone's
Yeah.
going to come to you few and far between. But I love that you also touched on joining associations because you're
Mhm.
right. That is so important, is like building those networks because of the
Absolutely.
hidden job board, right? Because see, now you know that Shelley's background is not fake. She's actually in
It's
her beautiful
real.
office right in DC. Isn't that gorgeous? But no, I love that about the job boards and everything. That's
Yeah.
exactly right, like joining associations. And I mentioned that Shelley and I know each other and we're friends, but it's been so wonderful to see you land at your dream job.
Thank you. Yeah.
I was also there for some of the zigs and zags.
Yes. Right.
So, I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, can you share some of the decisions you made along the way that at the time may have seemed arbitrary, but ended up positioning you for your ultimate dream job?
Yeah. So I'm going to change the word arbitrary to scary,
Yeah.
because again, I am not a huge risk taker, especially when it comes to my work, or at the time I wasn't. I'm much more comfortable now, but there was a real pivotal moment where we had moved to a location and there was a hiring freeze on academic jobs because of the economy of that particular state. Bizarre situation. Um, And I was completely at a loss. Like I thought I really was feeling stuck and I didn't know where to turn. And that's where I really started to say, okay, let's crack this apart. What are my personal priorities? What are my skill sets? What can I learn? And so I used that fulfillment and research, those two prongs, and I started doing research for a nonprofit that served military families because I thought, this is one of those things that when I was in my full-time academic job, I kind of wished I had more time to give back. So that's where I started, but also recognizing that I needed to be exercising certain skill sets to carry along the way. So for me, that idea of volunteering in a field that was out of my existing academic area of expertise was really overwhelming and scary because that's not really the way it's done in this profession. You kind of stick in one line of research expertise. But in doing that, I was learning so much. I had a lot more opportunities that don't present themselves very easily in academia. So research presentations and white papers and that kind of thing were coming very, very quickly. And so I kind of stayed in that vein for many years. It ended up being about 10 years that I kept doing that and kind of building those skills while also teaching part-time on the side because I love it. That whole idea of like embracing a different career path that on the surface looks like it has nothing to do with my original path was very scary. But in the end, the paths really came together here at Hopkins because we do have a nonprofit communication track. And so I was able to kind of bring all of it together in one place, which I would never have predicted would even be an option.
So I knew you when you were working at the nonprofit, and just the one thing that I would just say is that you were not like one foot in looking for your next
Mhm.
opportunity. You were all in.
Yeah, yeah. And part of it was because, I'd kind of scan the landscape, but also I would get involved in these projects that were incredible, that were an amazing opportunity that I could not pass up. And there were times where I would just dig right into that opportunity and kind of not worry too much about that end goal. And that made me more flexible in embracing those things coming before me. So then I had the opportunity to present research in some amazing places and to make some changes in the landscape that I am super proud of. And I really don't think that ever would have happened if I had stayed in that very straight and narrow trajectory that is sort of prescribed in academia.
Yeah, no, it was definitely, I mean, if we can put it into military terms, or I think everybody uses this, but they were very career broadening, life broadening experience.
100%. And I would have been blind to it had I not had those moments where I was forced to think of this in new and different ways. I really thought at the beginning of my career and when I married my husband that, oh, it's going to be fine. I'll figure it out. And there were times where it almost felt like there's no figuring this one out. But there was always a place to turn, a thing to try. And so I think my number one life lesson was to leave an opening um, for those unexpected opportunities and to not control it all.
No, and I was going to ask you what your like three biggest lessons in your career would have been. So you gave us one. But like, we keep talking about hindsight, hindsight, hindsight. So I feel
Yeah,
like we have different perspectives to share with those who are just starting out in the military lifestyle, because we do have that hindsight of, Joe served for like what, 26 years,
28, yeah.
8 years, and Kevin served for 22. So it's like we have the hindsight of trying to balance for over 2 decades, and then now we're on the other side of it. So
Yeah.
what are two other lessons you learned?
So definitely remaining flexible, um, being open to the opportunities that don't necessarily make sense at the time. If you feel like you want to try it, then just try it. There was a moment where I really was thinking of like going to Starbucks to work as a barista for that just fulfilling part. I thought it sounded great. It would be a way to bring in money. It was a good holding pattern. There is, you can move with those kinds of jobs. And so for me, I had to let go of the reins of feeling like I needed to control all of it. Um, but then one of the other lessons that did work out for me was just keeping an eye on where you personally want to head. I knew that full-time academia was where I wanted to be. So where can I find just the skills? Don't worry about the name of the title. Don't worry about what you're doing. Where can I pick up those skills? Maybe it's something like doing certifications. There's lots of, great free online certifications now available. Are there events I can attend? Are there people I can talk to about how they do their work? When I really boiled it down, it was just capturing skills.
And I love that you have never mentioned that you also have your PhD. So, and then, you say, you thought about working as a barista just as casually as you didn't mention that you have your PhD. Like you really do live that, that mantra, which is like, it's all about the skills and not about the title, which I think is
Yes.
huge because I think some of us, like at NMSN, we always say that, people always ask, what are portable careers? I'm like, I think any career can be portable. You just have to tell me what you're interested in.
Yes.
Just in a corner office on K
Mhm.
Street and like, like trying cases in front of the Supreme Court, that's probably not that portable. But if
Right.
you're interested in helping people through the pursuit of law or the practice of law, very portable. So
Yes.
it's all a mindset. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, like we could talk forever, but I appreciate you boiling it down to 3 lessons learned. And if you want to ask Shelley more questions, and I hope you will, just put them in the comments and we will get them to her and she'll answer them, I'm sure. She's very generous about that. And if you haven't read her highlight, I hope you go online and read them. Shelley, I'm sure we'll continue this conversation over dinner at some point, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
And
you so much for having me. It's such an important, I don't know, it's an important opportunity to kind of tell others that it's all right. Like, even if the recipe or the equation doesn't seem like it's quite right, it can be.
yeah, and it will be.
Right.
Listen to 2 people with hindsight.
Yeah.
So thank you to our friends at USAA for making these conversations possible. And I hope we see you guys back here next week. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.